Welcome. Let's start. The more you give, the more you have. You know, it's funny how life works. Sometimes we grow up being told to hold on tight to what we have. Save your money, guard your time, protect your energy, make sure you're not giving too much away, because then there won't be enough left for you. That makes sense when we're talking about something physical, right? If I give you the last slice of pizza, I don't have it anymore. Simple math. But there's something else, something deeper, that doesn't follow those rules. And that's what this little paradox is all about. The more you give, the more you have. It doesn't sound logical at first. It sounds like one of those nice sounding quotes people share on social media. But I've seen it in real life. You probably have too, even if you didn't notice it right away. I remember a woman I used to work with, named Anna. She was a nurse at a busy hospital, a single mom with 2 kids at home. Always juggling shifts, school schedules, bills, you name it. On paper, she should have been completely exhausted. And don't get me wrong, she was tired. You could see it in her eyes sometimes. But somehow, she was also the one who always had a kind word, who stayed 5 minutes longer, with a patient who needed someone, who brought an extra cup of tea for a colleague having a rough day. One day I asked her, "How do you do it? How do you keep showing up for people like this, when you've already got so much on your plate?" She just smiled and said, "I don't know, it fills me up. Giving reminds me, I'm still here, I'm still useful, I'm still me." That answer stayed with me. Because what she said wasn't about being a saint or a hero. It wasn't even about being selfless. It was about connection, about the strange way giving something away, your time, your care, your attention, can somehow leave you feeling more full than before. I think that's what this paradox really points to. Not that we should give everything we have until we burn out, but that when we give from a genuine place, something shifts. It opens something in us. It brings us back to what matters. And that creates a kind of wealth no bank account can touch. There was another person, Marcus, a retired teacher in his 70s. He'd lost his wife a few years earlier and had slipped into a quiet kind of loneliness. His house was too quiet. His days were all the same. At some point, he started feeling invisible. Then one day, he put a bench out by the sidewalk in front of his home. Just a simple wooden bench, with a sign that said, "Need to talk, take a seat." He didn't really expect anyone to stop, but someone did. A little boy from the neighborhood, who wanted to tell someone about his dog. Then a teenager, who didn't say much at all, just sat and stared at the sky. Then a young woman, who had just lost her job. Marcus didn't have advice. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. And slowly something shifted, not just in the people who sat beside him, but in him too. He told me once, "I thought I was done giving, but maybe giving is how I keep living." I'll never forget that. Giving doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need a stage or a spotlight. It can be holding the door open, checking in on someone, sharing your story, even if it's a little messy. Giving is a way of saying, "I see you, I care, you matter." And in saying that to others, we start to remember it's true about ourselves too. Now let me be clear. I'm not talking about giving to the point of exhaustion. This isn't about being the person who always says yes, even when your own needs go unmet. True giving doesn't ignore your limits. It honors them. It flows best when it's rooted in honesty, when it comes from a place of wanting to share, not needing to prove. It's easy to forget that, especially in a world that tells us to compete, to hustle, to gather more followers, more money, more stuff. But the things that really feed us, the ones that last, don't come from what we collect. They come from what we offer. And that's why this paradox is so powerful, because it invites us to shift our mindset from scarcity to abundance, from protecting to participating, from isolation to connection. You don't have to wait until you have enough to start giving. You don't have to be perfect, rich, or full of energy. Sometimes, the smallest things we offer are the ones that leave the biggest mark. A smile, a pause, a moment of real attention. These things don't cost us much, but they mean everything to someone else. And somehow, giving them leaves us not with less, but with more warmth, more clarity, more meaning, more of that quiet feeling that says, "I'm part of something bigger than myself." So if you ever find yourself feeling empty, like life is passing you by, try giving. Not out of obligation, not because you should, but because it might just be the doorway back to yourself. Because in this strange and beautiful life, sometimes the math doesn't add up in the way we expect. Sometimes, the most generous thing you can do is also the most healing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the more you give, the more you truly have. And maybe that's a good place to begin again. Because the next paradox is about something just as mysterious: happiness. We all want it. We chase it. We search high and low for it. But what if happiness isn't something you find by running toward it? What if the real secret is learning to stop? Let's talk about that. Happiness grows when you stop chasing it. Let's talk about happiness. It's funny how much we talk about it, how much we think about it. Almost every decision we make has something to do with it, whether we realize it or not. We want to be happy. We think we should be happy. And if we're not, well, then we assume we must be doing something wrong, or worse, that something's wrong with us. I spent years chasing happiness. Honestly, I don't even think I realized that's what I was doing. I just thought I was following the plan. You know, the one: go to school, get a good job, find someone to love, build a life, travel, stay busy, work hard, celebrate your wins, post your best moments. I checked all the boxes, and yet something always felt a little off. Like I was doing all the right things, but the feeling I was chasing never stuck around for long. It was like trying to hold fog in your hands. You reach for it, and the tighter you try to grip it, the faster it slips through your fingers. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of people feel the same way, but don't know how to talk about it. We've been told happiness is something we earn, that it comes after the goal is reached, after we've improved enough, achieved enough, figured it all out. But here's the paradox. The more we chase happiness, the more it runs from us. It's like a shy animal. If you go stomping into the forest shouting its name, it hides. But if you sit still long enough, sometimes it appears, quiet, gentle, unexpected. I remember one day in particular. It wasn't special. In fact, it was a day when nothing had gone according to plan. I was tired, a little frustrated, and instead of pushing through, like I usually did, I just stopped. I walked outside. I sat on a park bench. I left my phone in my pocket. I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't even try to think positively. I just sat. And as the minutes passed, I started to notice things again. The way the breeze moved through the trees, a little girl laughing as she chased pigeons, the sound of my own breathing, and in that stillness, something softened inside me. I felt peaceful, not excited, not triumphant, just okay, calm, present. And honestly, that tiny feeling of okayness felt better than any big high I'd been chasing for years. That moment taught me something. Happiness isn't a trophy you win. It's not the result of doing everything perfectly. It's not something you can force. It's something that grows quietly when you make room for it. I started to experiment with that idea. I stopped scheduling every moment of my life. I gave myself permission to do nothing sometimes. To walk without a destination. To read a book without highlighting anything. To cook a meal just because I felt like it. Not because it was healthy or impressive or productive. And strangely, happiness started showing up more often. Not in huge fireworks kind of ways, but in warm, steady waves. A morning cup of coffee that tasted better because I wasn't multitasking. A conversation with a friend where I didn't feel the need to sound interesting. I just listened and let them be real. A sunset that caught me off guard on the way home. It turns out, happiness doesn't always live in the big wins. Sometimes it hides in the quiet corners we ignore. And when we stop trying so hard to hunt it down, we start to notice it. That's when it begins to grow. A friend of mine, Sarah, once told me about her garden. She said she used to be obsessed with making it perfect. She read every blog, followed every tip, watered everything by schedule. But the more she tried to control it, the more stressed she felt. Nothing grew quite right. Everything felt forced. Then one summer, she got too busy to micromanage it. She just let it be. She watered it when she remembered, pulled a weed here and there, and to her surprise, it started to bloom like never before. Happiness is like that, she said. It doesn't respond to pressure, it needs space. That stuck with me. And no, this doesn't mean we should never strive, never dream, never reach. Growth is beautiful, Challenges can be meaningful, but there's a difference between moving towards something with love and chasing something because you're scared of what will happen if you don't catch it. When we chase happiness because we're afraid of being still, or afraid of being alone, or afraid of feeling sad, it rarely shows up the way we hope. But when we allow ourselves to just be human, to sit with whatever is here, without needing it to change right away, happiness sneaks back in through the side door. It shows up in the softness between thoughts, in the moment you stop scrolling and look out the window, in the long exhale after a good cry, in the unexpected burst of laughter that takes you by surprise. It doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like contentment, like peace, like a quiet yes inside your chest. So maybe the key isn't chasing happiness. Maybe the key is creating space for it to arrive, to breathe, to stretch, to stay a little longer. And if we can do that, even just a little, we might notice that we're not as far from it as we thought. The truth is, happiness has never been hiding. We've just been running too fast to see it. And speaking of seeing things, sometimes the real gift of slowing down is realizing how little we actually need to feel full. Not because life becomes boring or small, but because something shifts. We start noticing beauty in simplicity, meaning in the ordinary. We start realizing that a rich life isn't about more, it's about less, done with care. And that brings us to our next paradox. The simpler life gets, the richer it feels. I don't know when it started, but at some point we began believing that more is always better. More success, more options, more achievements, more things. Like if we could just collect enough experiences, enough recognition, enough money, then we'd finally feel secure, finally feel satisfied, finally feel alive. But it's strange, isn't it? The more we pile on, the heavier things feel. We fill our calendars, our closets, our screens, our minds. And even when we're surrounded by more, there's often this quiet sense of lack, like something essential is missing underneath it all. I've felt it. I've looked around at a life that was technically full, busy days, social invitations, constant stimulation, and yet there I was, feeling strangely empty. I had everything I thought I needed, and somehow, it still didn't feel like enough. It wasn't until I started letting go, slowly, carefully, sometimes reluctantly, that things began to shift. I remember one weekend when I turned off all my notifications. No pings, no dings, no buzzing in my pocket, just silence. At first it felt weird, like something was missing, but then something else crept in, a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. I started to notice the way sunlight moved across the floor. I sat down and actually tasted my coffee, instead of just drinking it while answering emails. I didn't do much that day, and yet at the end of it, I felt oddly full in a way I hadn't felt in months. And that's when it really landed. The simpler life gets, the richer it feels. Not because there's less going on, but because there's finally room to notice what was always there. There's something deeply human about craving space. Not just physical space, but mental space, emotional space. Space to think, to breathe, to feel, to be. But the world around us keeps pushing more apps, more advice, more things to fix, more ways to optimize. It never really stops unless we decide to stop it. I had a friend named David who used to live a fast-paced life. He was constantly plugged in, meetings, travel, deadlines, parties. He told me once that he didn't even know how to be alone with himself. Silence made him nervous. Stillness felt like failure, so he filled every gap in his day with something, anything, to distract from that discomfort. But then something happened. He burned out. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until one day, he just couldn't do it anymore. He moved out of the city, rented a small cabin, and for a while, he didn't do much of anything. He didn't make grand plans. He just sat by the window and listened to the rain, went for long walks with no destination, read books slowly, sometimes reading the same paragraph twice, just because it felt good. When I spoke to him a few months later, he sounded different, lighter. Not because he had figured everything out, but because he had finally stopped trying to chase richness in the form of more, and started finding it in the form of less. He told me, I used to think I was living a big life, but honestly, I feel more alive now just watching birds from my porch than I ever did sitting in some corner office. That really stuck with me, because it's easy to confuse full with rich, but they're not the same. A life can be full of noise, full of motion, and still feel paper thin. And a life that looks quiet from the outside can feel deeply textured and meaningful from within. What makes a life rich isn't how many experiences you cram into it, but how deeply you experience the ones you already have. It's in the way you sip your tea, instead of gulping it down. It's in hearing the lyrics of a song you've played 100 times, but never listened to. It's in noticing the way someone's eyes soften when they talk about something they love. It's in saying no to the thing that looks exciting so you can say yes to the thing that actually feels like home. I'm not saying simplicity solves everything. Life will always have its complexities, its messes, its unpredictable twists, but when we simplify where we can, we make room for what really matters to take root. We make space for presence, for real connection, for the kind of richness that doesn't show up in bank statements or Instagram feeds, but in how fully we inhabit our own lives. And the beautiful part, simplicity doesn't require you to go live in the woods or throw away all your belongings. It can begin with something as small as taking a slower walk, or eating a meal without a screen in front of you, or saying no to one extra obligation, just to have a night where nothing is planned. That kind of space, it nourishes us. It brings us back to ourselves. And it helps us see something we often miss, that we already have so much. We just need to clear a little room to feel it. So if life feels heavy, if your days feel overstuffed but underwhelming, maybe ask yourself, what can I let go of? Not to punish yourself, not to become more productive, but to make space for the richness that's already waiting. Because sometimes we don't need more in our lives. We just need more of less. And that changes everything. And as we begin to clear that space, another paradox begins to reveal itself. One that speaks to something even deeper than simplicity. Something about truth, about who we really are when we stop performing, about how the parts of us we often try to hide, those messy, imperfect, vulnerable parts, might actually be where our real strength lives. True strength comes from softness. Let's talk about that next. True strength comes from softness. There was a time when I thought strength meant holding everything together, being the one who doesn't cry, the one who keeps a straight face, the one who gets through things, no matter how hard, without complaining. I thought strength looked like stoicism, toughness, control, resilience, without cracks. And to be fair, that version of strength can be useful. Life throws things at us that require grit, endurance, a certain steadiness in the storm. But what I didn't understand back then was that real strength, deep, human, lasting strength, doesn't always look like a clenched jaw or a stiff upper lip. Sometimes, it looks like softness. It's in the person who dares to say, I'm not okay. In the one who chooses to rest, even when the world is telling them to hustle. In the friend who shows up with tears in their eyes and still reaches for your hand. I remember watching my grandfather cry for the first time. I was a teenager, and up until that point, I had only known him as this quiet, sturdy man. He was always composed, always calm. But then my grandmother passed, and I saw something shift. At the funeral, he stood by her casket, eyes full of tears, voice trembling, as he told her goodbye. And I remember thinking, this is the strongest I've ever seen him, not because he held it all in, but because he didn't. He let it move through him. It's the love, the vulnerability. And in that moment, he wasn't smaller, he was bigger, more human, more real, more whole. That's the paradox, isn't it? We think showing emotion makes us weak, but it's the opposite. It takes an incredible amount of courage to be soft in a world that tells us to be hard, to say, I feel this, I care about this, I'm not numb. Softness isn't about being fragile, it's about being open, and being open in a world that sometimes hurts. That's not weakness, that's brave. I once met a woman named Eliza, a therapist who had worked with trauma survivors for decades. I asked her how she kept going, how she stayed present with all that pain, without becoming numb or overwhelmed. She said, people think I'm strong, because I've heard so many hard stories. But my strength doesn't come from being unaffected. It comes from letting those stories touch me, from crying when I need to, from going home and sitting with the weight of it, and still choosing to come back the next day with an open heart. She paused, then added, if I close off, I can't really help anyone, so I stay soft. That's how I stay strong. That stayed with me, because we've been taught to armor up, to be invulnerable, to protect ourselves from heartbreak, disappointment, failure. But all that armoring, it also blocks joy, it blocks connection, it keeps us from being fully known. Real strength is choosing to stay connected, to your heart, to others, to what matters, even when it hurts. It's in the father who tells his son, "I'm proud of you," even though he never heard those words from his own father. It's in the teenager who admits they're scared, instead of pretending they don't care. It's in the leader who says, "I don't have all the answers, but I'm listening." Softness isn't passivity, it's not weakness, it's a quiet kind of power. The power to remain human in the face of hardness, to choose love in the presence of fear, to stay open even when you've been hurt before. I think that's what we're really longing for. Not to be invincible, but to be real, to live in a way that feels true. And truth is often messy, it shakes, it breaks down sometimes, but it also connects us more deeply than anything polished ever could. The strongest people I know are not the ones who never fall apart, they're the ones who do, and then choose to get back up with tenderness, who hold space for both the storm and the quiet, who understand that healing doesn't mean erasing the pain, but learning to carry it with grace. And if we're honest, we already know this, because when someone is soft with us, when they see us, hear us, accept us, it's like something inside us unclenches. We feel safe, not because they're tough, but because they're real. So maybe strength isn't what we thought it was. Maybe it's not about how much you can carry alone, but how willing you are to let someone help you carry it. Maybe it's not about hiding your pain, but about letting it shape you into someone even more compassionate. Maybe the most powerful thing you can do isn't to build a wall, but to open a door. And maybe the softest parts of us, the ones we try to hide, are actually where all the light gets in. So if you've been told to toughen up, to stop crying, to keep it together, I want you to know, your softness is not your weakness, it's your strength. It means your heart is still working, still open, still alive. And in a world that sometimes forgets what it means to be human, that's something to be proud of. So breathe, feel what you need to feel, speak with honesty, rest when you're tired. And don't be afraid to be gentle with yourself and others, because softness is not the opposite of strength. Sometimes, it's the source of it. And as we soften, something else begins to shift too. We stop comparing, stop pretending. We stop needing to wear a mask to be accepted. And we begin to notice something surprising. The more you accept your flaws, the more lovable you become. Let's explore that next. The more you accept your flaws, the more lovable you become. For a long time, I thought being lovable meant being impressive, being the one who had it all figured out, being confident, polished, calm under pressure, always saying the right thing. I thought if I could just be better, I'd finally deserve the kind of love I secretly longed for. So I tried. I tried to look like I had it together. I downplayed the parts of me that felt messy or unsure. I put a smile on, even when I didn't feel like smiling. I held my breath a lot, hoping that no one would see the cracks. And for a while it worked. Kind of. People liked me. I fit in. I got compliments. But it never felt real. Not deeply. Because no matter how much praise I got, I knew they were only seeing the version of me I allowed them to see. The curated version. The controlled one. And that made it impossible to truly feel loved. Because if people don't see the real you, how can you trust that they really care? It's a strange thing, isn't it? We hide the parts of ourselves we're ashamed of, thinking they'll make us unlovable, when those are often the exact parts that make us feel closest to one another. I didn't fully understand this until a friend of mine broke down in front of me one night. She was someone I always saw as strong, put together, organized, emotionally steady. But that night, she just couldn't hold it in anymore. She told me she was tired of pretending, that she felt like a fraud, that her inner critic never shut up, that she was afraid people only liked her because she was always useful. And I remember listening to her, sitting across from her, watching the tears roll down her cheeks, and thinking, I've never loved you more than I do right now. Not because she was suffering, but because she was finally real, and her honesty unlocked something in me too. It made space. It gave me permission to let go of the mask I'd been wearing. We talked for hours that night, about our insecurities, our regrets, our fears. and it was one of the most beautiful bonding conversations of my life. That's when it clicked. We don't connect through perfection. We connect through honesty, through shared humanity, through all the messy, uncertain, deeply flawed pieces that we usually try to hide. And it's not just about friendships or romantic relationships. It's about how we see ourselves too. Because when you're constantly at war with your own imperfections, it's exhausting. You live in fear of being exposed. You spend your energy trying to cover the things you think make you less than. And ironically, that very effort is what creates distance between you and others, and between you and yourself. But when you stop fighting your flaws, when you start holding them with a little softness, something shifts. You begin to realize that your worth was never tied to your perfection, that maybe, just maybe, you're lovable not in spite of your flaws, but because of them. Because flaws are what make you human. They're where your stories live. They're what give you depth and character and compassion. And when you own them, when you say, yeah, this is me, I'm working on it, but I'm still worthy of love, you become magnetic. Not perfect, not polished, just real. I met a man once, in his 60s, who had struggled his whole life with stuttering. As a child, he was teased for it. As an adult, he avoided speaking in public. For decades he tried everything to fix it. Speech therapy, breathing exercises, mental tricks. Some things helped, but it never fully went away. Then one day he made a decision. He said, I'm done apologizing for the way I talk. He started introducing himself by saying, I stutter sometimes. Just give me a moment if I get stuck. That's it. Simple. No shame. No over-explaining. And people responded with kindness, with patience, with respect. And you know what? He told me that after he stopped trying to hide it, the stutter actually showed up less. But even when it did, he wasn't afraid of it anymore. He'd made peace with it. And in doing so, he gave others permission to meet him where he was. That kind of self-acceptance is powerful. It doesn't mean giving up on growth. It doesn't mean we never try to improve or learn or heal. But it means we stop waiting to be fixed before we allow ourselves to be loved. The truth is, nobody relates to perfect. We relate to each other through our shared struggles, through the little quirks and scars that remind us, I've been there too. That's what makes someone feel safe, seen, understood. So maybe the next time you catch yourself cringing at something you said, or criticizing the shape of your body, or comparing your journey to someone else's, pause, take a breath, and remind yourself that you don't have to be flawless to be lovable. You just have to be honest. With yourself, with the people who care about you, with the world. You don't have to edit yourself to be worthy of connection. The right people won't love you less for being human. If anything, they'll love you more. And maybe, just maybe, that includes you too. Because the more you accept your flaws, the more space you create for real love to grow. The kind that doesn't need you to perform. The kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket and says, you're enough, right here, right now. And when you begin to believe that, something else changes too. You stop needing to control everything. You stop gripping so tightly. You begin to let go, not in defeat, but in trust, in faith that what's meant for you will still find you. Because here's the next beautiful paradox. Letting go is the first step to receiving letting go. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Two small words. And yet when you're in the middle of it, when you're holding on tightly to something you care about, it can feel like the hardest thing in the world. We're taught to hold on, to keep fighting, to push through, to never give up. And in many ways, there's strength in that. There's something admirable about staying committed, about showing resilience. But sometimes, what takes even more strength is knowing when to loosen your grip. Because the truth is, not everything we hold on to is meant to stay. Some things, and some people, and some dreams are only meant to walk with us for a little while. And when we try to force them to last forever, we end up blocking what might be trying to find us next. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I was in a relationship that I thought would last forever. It wasn't perfect, of course. No relationship is. But I had built so much around it. My routines, my future plans, even the way I saw myself. And when it started to fall apart, I didn't want to let go. I told myself we could fix it. I told myself maybe it was just a phase, that all couples go through rough patches. I held on so tightly, not because it felt right, but because I was afraid of what life would look like without it. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it. The quiet unraveling. The way we stopped hearing each other. The way love had been replaced with something more like fear. Fear of loss. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. And eventually, after months of pretending and hoping and bargaining, I let go. It didn't happen in a single moment. It was a slow release. 1,000 little choices to stop clinging, to stop trying to control something that no longer fit. And at first, it was painful. It felt like failure, like emptiness. But over time, something unexpected happened. I started to breathe again. I started to come back to myself. And little by little, space began to open. Space I didn't even know I had been missing. Space for reflection, for new friendships, for a quieter, deeper kind of joy that wasn't tied to holding anything together. It was only when I let go that my hands were open enough to receive what was next. That's the paradox. We think letting go means losing, but sometimes it's the only way to gain, to make room for what's actually meant for us, to receive the peace, the clarity, the love that couldn't land while we were gripping so tightly onto what used to be right. I think we do this in all areas of life, not just relationships. We hold on to careers that no longer bring us alive because we're afraid to start over. We cling to old versions of ourselves, the high achiever, the helper, the one who always has the answer, because it feels safer than not knowing who we'll be without that identity. We carry guilt from the past, thinking if we let it go, we're letting ourselves off the hook. We hold on to control, of schedules, of outcomes, of people, thinking if we let go, things will fall apart. But maybe, things fall into place when we stop trying so hard to hold them together. I met someone once who said, letting go doesn't mean I don't care anymore. It just means I'm done carrying what was never mine to carry. That line hit me in the chest, because we carry so much, don't we? Other people's expectations, old narratives, fear disguised as responsibility. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do, for ourselves, and for the people around us, is to set it down. Not in anger, not in resentment, but in love, in faith. Faith that what's meant for us won't need to be forced. Faith that what's gone made space for what's to come. And it's not about giving up. Letting go is not the same as quitting. Quitting says, I'm done. Letting go says I'm ready. Ready to receive life as it is, not as I tried to force it to be. It takes courage to release something that feels familiar, even when it's heavy, even when it hurts. But that release, that choice to trust instead of cling, it's one of the most freeing things you'll ever do. And the gifts that come after, they're often ones you couldn't have planned. New relationships that meet you where you are now. Opportunities that feel aligned. Moments of peace you didn't know you were missing, but you only find them when your hands are open. And maybe that's what this is really about. Not the pain of losing, but the practice of allowing. Letting life flow. Letting love find you again. Letting yourself be surprised by the grace that can arrive when you stop trying to control every piece of the puzzle. Letting go doesn't mean you failed. It means you grew. It means you trusted that you don't have to hold everything in place for things to be okay. And maybe, just maybe, it means you're ready. Ready to receive. And as you begin to receive, something beautiful begins to unfold. You start to feel lighter, more connected. You begin to understand that you don't need to be constantly strong, constantly in charge. That maybe, just maybe, there's freedom in allowing help, in being seen, in letting others show up for you. Not because you're helpless, but because you're human. Because true strength isn't always doing it alone. You are strongest when you allow others to help you. Let's talk about that next. You are strongest when you allow others to help you. For most of my life, I thought strength meant independence, handling things on my own, solving my problems without bothering anyone. I grew up admiring people who were self-reliant, who didn't complain, who didn't ask for help, people who just kept going, no matter what life threw at them. And I tried to be that kind of person too. The strong one, the reliable one, the I'm fine one, even when I wasn't. But the thing is, that kind of strength starts to wear you down. It becomes a heavy kind of pride, one that keeps you isolated, even when you're surrounded by people, one that whispers, don't show weakness, don't be a burden, you should be able to handle this. And for a long time, I listened to that voice, especially during the hard times, when grief hit me like a wave, when I felt overwhelmed and anxious, when things were falling apart behind the scenes, and I was still showing up with a smile, pretending like I had it together. I remember one night, not long after I'd lost someone I loved deeply. I was alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, feeling completely hollow. I could have called someone. I had friends. I had people who loved me, but I didn't. I told myself, they're probably busy. I don't want to bring them down. I should be able to get through this on my own. So I didn't call. I just sat in the dark, holding it all in. And I'll never forget how lonely that felt. Not because no one cared, but because I didn't let anyone show that they did. It wasn't until months later, during a conversation with an old friend, that I finally broke down. I didn't plan it. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I cried. I said the things I'd been carrying, the doubts, the fears, the pain. I hadn't spoken aloud. And you know what happened? She didn't try to fix it. She didn't offer advice or tell me to be positive. She just listened, fully, kindly. She stayed on the line with me until my voice steadied again. And then she said something I'll never forget. You don't always have to be the strong one. You can let people love you too. That moment cracked something open in me, because I realized how much I had been starving for that. Not solutions, not praise, just presence, support, love without conditions. And I realized something else too. Letting someone help you, it doesn't make you weaker, it makes you braver. Because to let someone in, especially when you're struggling, means putting down the shield. It means admitting you don't have all the answers, that you're human. And that's not a flaw. That's not failure. That's truth. And truth is where real connection begins. I once read a quote that said, "Strength isn't how much you can carry alone. It's how much you're willing to share." And I think that's what this paradox is really about. That we become stronger, not by isolating ourselves, but by allowing others to stand beside us, to lift us when we're tired, to remind us of who we are when we've forgotten. And it's not just about the big dramatic moments. Sometimes it's in the small quiet gestures, saying, "Actually, I could use a hand with this," or "Would you mind talking for a bit? I'm feeling off today," or simply being honest when someone asks, "How are you?" Those moments of vulnerability, they build something, not just inside you, but between you and the other person. They create trust, intimacy, real connection. And when you allow that in, life feels a little less heavy, not because the problems disappear, but because you're no longer carrying them alone. I think back to my grandfather again, the same one I saw cry at my grandmother's funeral. After she passed, people offered to help him bring food, drive him to appointments, just sit with him for a while. And at first he refused, politely, but firmly. "I'm fine," he'd say. "Don't worry about me." It was his instinct, a lifetime of being the provider, the strong one, the rock of the family. But eventually, slowly, he started to say yes. He let his neighbors bring him dinner. He let my cousin mow his lawn. He even joined a local grief group, where he listened more than he spoke. But he was there. He showed up, and the most amazing thing happened. He didn't shrink by accepting help. He softened. He became more present, more open. He laughed more. He told stories. He connected. And it didn't make him any less strong. It made him more whole. Sometimes we think we have to earn love by being tough. But the truth is, people want to love us when we're real, when we let them in. And that includes letting them support us when we're not at our best. It's not about being needy. It's about being honest. And honest people, people who can say, "I need help," they're not weak. They're just awake to the truth of being human. So if you've been carrying something alone, maybe it's time to open your hands, to let someone help. You don't have to have a breakdown to ask for support. You don't have to explain everything. You just have to let yourself be seen. And in doing that, you might find that the strength you were trying so hard to prove was already there, all along. And that it's even stronger when shared. You are not alone. You never were. And sometimes, the real courage isn't in standing tall, but in letting someone sit beside you when you can't. And the beautiful thing, when you do that, something else begins to unfold. A deeper kind of love, not just from others, but for yourself. Because when you stop hiding your needs, you stop hiding your heart. And that's where real love begins. Which brings us to the next paradox. The more you love yourself, the more you can love others. I used to think self-love was selfish, but it meant putting yourself first in a way that left others behind. that it was about indulgence or ego or walking around like you're better than everyone else. I thought real love, the good kind, was about sacrifice, about showing up for others, even when you were falling apart inside, especially then. That loving well meant giving everything away. But the truth is, I was giving from an empty cup, and eventually, I ran out. I burned out trying to be everything for everyone. I said yes to things I didn't want to do. I stayed in places that drained me. I tried to earn love by giving more than I had. And when I finally crashed, I was confused, hurt, resentful. I remember thinking, how can I feel so alone when I've given so much? And then it hit me. I had been loving everyone except myself. I was offering patience. I didn't extend to my own thoughts. I was comforting others with words I never spoke to myself. I was forgiving mistakes in everyone else, but holding myself hostage for mine. I kept pouring and pouring, but the well inside me was dry. That's when I started to learn what self-love really is, and how essential it is, not just for our own healing, but for our ability to love others in a healthy, wholehearted way. Because when you don't love yourself, not in the cheesy surface-level way, but in the real, gritty, forgiving, compassionate kind of way, you start to need love from others in a way that isn't fair to them or to you. You look to people to fill a gap that only you can fill. You take things personally. You lose yourself trying to keep others happy. You confuse attention with affection. You settle for less than you deserve, because deep down, you're not sure you deserve much. I've been there, more than once. But something began to shift when I stopped asking others to prove I was worthy, and started whispering it to myself instead. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning bolt moment. Just small choices. Talking to myself a little more gently. Saying no, without guilt. Giving myself the same grace I'd offer to someone I loved. Resting without having to earn it. Allowing myself to be proud of who I was becoming. Not who I used to be or who I thought I had to be. And what I noticed was that the more I loved myself, the less I needed from other people. Not because I stopped caring, but because I started showing up to relationships from a place of wholeness instead of lack. I could listen without needing to fix. I could support without losing myself. I could love freely, not desperately. Because when your love for yourself is rooted in honesty and softness, not arrogance, you stop looking for love to complete you. You start sharing it because you have it to give. And that kind of love, it's different. It's calmer, steadier. It doesn't grasp or chase or demand. It invites. It holds space. It grows. I once met a woman who radiated that kind of love. You know those people who just feel safe to be around. She was one of them. Not because she was perfect, but because she had done her work. She spoke openly about her past, her struggles, the years she spent rejecting herself. And you could tell she had made peace with the parts of her she used to hide. And because of that, she could see others with so much clarity, so much compassion. She didn't flinch at other people's flaws. She didn't try to fix or rescue. She just showed up, fully, kindly, present. I asked her once how she became that way, and she said something I'll never forget. The more I learned to sit with my own pain, the more I could sit with someone else's without running from it. I can only hold others because I've finally learned to hold myself. That's what this paradox means to me. That self-love isn't just about you. It's about the kind of love you're able to offer the world once you stop abandoning yourself. Because the truth is, when you don't love yourself, it's hard to trust love from others. It feels like something you have to earn, something you have to perform for. And deep down, you're always waiting for it to be taken away. But when you do love yourself, when you accept your mess, your beauty, your weirdness, your wounds, love stops being this fragile thing. It becomes grounded, real. You stop needing people to save you. You start letting them see you. And that's what people want. Not perfection, but presence. We all just want to feel seen. And that starts with how we see ourselves. So if you've been pouring into everyone else but ignoring your own heart, maybe it's time to come home to yourself, to offer the same patience, kindness, and care you give so freely to others. Because when you love yourself, you stop showing up from a place of fear, and you start showing up from a place of truth. And when love is rooted in truth, it lasts. So no, self-love isn't selfish. It's sacred. It's the foundation for every relationship that truly matters. It's the soil that allows your compassion to grow strong roots. It's the place where real love begins. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that's steady enough to stay. And once you've tasted that, you stop forcing connections. You stop begging to be chosen. You realize you already belong, because you belong to yourself. And from there you start to let go of the old stories, the old roles, the need to prove. And in that letting go, something powerful happens, something unexpected. You become whole by embracing your brokenness. Let's walk into that next. You become whole by embracing your brokenness. I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point in life, I started believing that being broken meant being less. Like if you'd gone through something heavy, loss, heartbreak, failure, then you were somehow damaged. Not ruined, exactly, but not quite whole anymore. We're taught, often without words, that wholeness means being untouched, unscarred, whole. That healing means returning to how things were before the break. As if the goal is to erase the pain, to stitch ourselves back up so neatly that no one would ever know we'd fallen apart. But the truth is, we all fall apart at some point, and healing doesn't erase the story. It includes it. For a long time, I tried to hide my broken parts. The grief I didn't know how to process. The shame I carried, like a second skin. The fears I dressed up as ambition. I thought if I just focused on the good stuff, if I smiled enough, worked hard enough, stayed busy enough, maybe the cracks wouldn't show. But they did. They always do. Because the cracks are part of the design. They're where the light gets in, and where we get into each other's lives. Into truth, into love, that actually lasts. I remember once sitting across from someone I cared deeply about, and for the first time, I told them the truth. Not the polished version, the raw one. I told them about a failure that still haunted me, a relationship I had ruined, a part of myself I still hadn't forgiven, and I waited for the reaction, for them to flinch, pull away, think less of me, but they didn't. They leaned in, they said, "Me too," and in that moment, I realized something I'll never forget. It wasn't despite my brokenness that we connected, it was through it. That's where real connection lives, not in perfection, but in the places we're willing to show up messy and honest and unsure. That's where wholeness begins. Because wholeness isn't the absence of brokenness, it's what happens when you stop running from it, when you stop pretending it didn't happen, when you stop holding yourself at arm's length, when you stop waiting to be fixed before you let yourself feel worthy. You don't need to be put back together in the exact same way you once were. That version of you belonged to a different chapter. Maybe it was beautiful, maybe it was painful, but either way, it brought you here, and here is good, here is alive, here is where healing begins. I once read about the Japanese art of kintsugi. Maybe you've heard of it. It's the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, not hiding the cracks, but highlighting them, making them the most beautiful part of the piece. That's how I've started to see myself, not as someone ruined by the past, but as someone redesigned by it, someone with gold in their cracks, someone whose story isn't made smaller by pain, but made richer. And the more I embraced that truth, the more I noticed something else. The people I admired most weren't the ones who seemed untouched. They were the ones who had been through something, and still chose love, still chose hope, still stood up, even if their knees trembled. They had a kind of beauty that can't be faked, a kind of presence that can't be manufactured. It only comes from having walked through the fire and come out softer. It's easy to think we need to hide those parts of ourselves to be loved. But what if it's the opposite? What if our brokenness is what makes us relatable? What if it's what makes us real? I think the world is full of people pretending not to be broken, and I get it. It feels safer that way. But what we really need is more people brave enough to say, "I've been there too." People who aren't afraid of the shadows, because they've made peace with their own. Wholeness, as I've come to understand it, isn't about being flawless. It's about being fully here, fully you, with your scars, your softness, your strength, your sensitivity, with everything you've walked through, and everything you're still learning. And when you start to embrace that, when you stop wishing for the version of yourself that never got hurt, you realize you don't need to go backward. You just need to go deeper, deeper into truth, into compassion, into the kind of love that holds all of you, not just the shiny parts. You become whole not by avoiding your brokenness, but by bringing it into the light, by saying, "This happened, it changed me, but I'm still here, and I'm not ashamed of the journey." You don't have to love every part of the story right away. Some chapters take time, some wounds take time, but even in the not yet healed places, there is value, there is light, and maybe, just maybe, that's the version of you the world is waiting for, not the one who has it all figured out, but the one who's honest enough to say, I'm still becoming. Because when you embrace your brokenness, you stop hiding, you stop pretending, and in doing so, you invite others to do the same. You create space for connection, for softness, for something real to grow, and in that space, another truth begins to unfold, one that surprises you with its depth. The simpler life gets, the richer it feels. Oh, but we've been there, haven't we? Then maybe the next truth is this, that peace doesn't come from controlling everything, or getting rid of pain, or becoming perfect. Sometimes, peace begins when you stop fighting yourself. Let's talk about that next. Peace begins when you stop fighting yourself. I used to think peace was something I had to go out and find, like it was hiding somewhere far away, in a better job, a quieter place, a more perfect version of me. I told myself that once everything out there calmed down, then I could finally feel peace in here. So I chased it, in productivity, in overthinking, in self-improvement books, and carefully color-coded calendars. I tried to earn it, deserve it, control my way into it. But peace didn't come, not really. Because even on days when everything looked okay on the outside, I still carried restlessness inside. Even when I had time to breathe, I couldn't seem to exhale. Even in silence, my thoughts were loud, and eventually, I started to understand something. Peace isn't out there, waiting to be found. It's in here. It's always been in here. I just couldn't feel it, because I was too busy fighting myself. That was the part I didn't see for a long time. The quiet war I was waging inside, against my thoughts, my feelings, my memories, my body, my mistakes, my doubts. I didn't even realize how often I was pushing away parts of myself, telling them to be quieter, cleaner, more acceptable. I thought that was how you improved, by rejecting the parts that made you uncomfortable. But fighting yourself doesn't lead to peace. It leads to exhaustion. Because when you're constantly trying to suppress or fix everything you feel, you're living in resistance, and peace can't live in resistance. Peace needs space, it needs acceptance, it needs honesty, not just with the world, but with yourself. I remember a moment that changed something in me. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, barely awake, brushing my teeth, when I caught my own reflection, not just glanced at it, but really looked, and I felt this sudden wave of emotion I didn't expect. Not judgment, not shame, just fatigue. A kind of deep, inner tiredness, not from lack of sleep, but from years of fighting myself. And I remember whispering, without even thinking, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. Just a soft apology to the person I kept trying to outgrow. The version of me I always felt needed to be improved, before I could fully rest, before I could feel peace. That moment didn't fix everything, but it opened something, a crack in the armor I'd worn for years. And through that crack, a little light started to come in. I began to notice all the ways I resisted myself, the way I rushed past sadness, telling myself to toughen up, the way I overanalyzed every decision, afraid of getting something wrong, the way I criticized my body for not looking like it did 5 years ago, as if change was a betrayal. And I started asking different questions. Not, how do I fix this? But what part of me needs love right now? Not, how do I get rid of this feeling? But what is this feeling trying to say? That's when peace began to show up. Not all at once, not in some perfect, uninterrupted state, but in flickers, in small soft ways. It showed up when I stopped pushing my grief away and just let myself cry. It showed up when I forgave myself for saying the wrong thing, instead of replaying it all day. It showed up when I put my hand on my chest and reminded myself, you're safe here. You don't have to perform for your own heart. That's the shift. Peace doesn't mean never feeling uncomfortable again. It doesn't mean silencing your thoughts or escaping your emotions. It means making room for all of it, without turning it into a fight. It means holding yourself with compassion, even on the days you fall short. It means knowing that being human is messy and beautiful and complicated, and you don't have to fix all of it to feel worthy of rest. One of the most powerful things I've learned is that peace doesn't require perfection. It just asks for presence. And presence starts with honesty. with letting yourself be exactly who you are in this moment, without demanding that you be somewhere else first. When you stop fighting yourself, you stop waiting to be better before you're allowed to feel okay. You stop trying to prove your worth and start learning to trust it. You begin to experience stillness, not because life got easier, but because you stopped holding your breath through all of it. And slowly, peace becomes a place you return to, not one you have to chase. So if you've been feeling tired lately, not just in your body, but in your heart, maybe it's not because you're doing too little. Maybe it's because you're trying too hard to be someone you're not. Maybe it's time to put down the gloves and sit with yourself like an old friend. To stop asking, how do I fix me? And start asking, what if nothing is broken? Because the peace you're looking for, it might already be here, waiting, quietly, behind all the noise, behind the effort, behind the mask. It begins not with achievement, but with surrender. And often it begins in the moment you stop saying, I should be someone else, and instead whisper, maybe who I am is enough. And that right there opens the door to the next paradox. You find yourself when you let go of who you're supposed to be. For most of my life, I was busy becoming someone I thought I was supposed to be. Not necessarily someone I wanted to be, but someone the world seemed to approve of. Someone that fit the mold. Someone easy to like, strong, reliable, polite, put together, productive. Someone who didn't take up too much space, but still managed to be impressive. The version of me I believed would finally feel like enough. And so I performed. I adapted. I edited myself in small, invisible ways, speaking a little less, smiling a little more, brushing off what hurt, shrinking parts of me that felt too loud or too strange. I wore masks so well, I forgot they weren't my real face. But somewhere along the way, I lost touch with myself. Not all at once. It was more like a slow drifting, a quiet distance that started growing between who I was and who I thought I had to be. At first, I didn't even notice it. Everything looked fine on the surface. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But underneath, I was restless, empty in places I didn't have words for. I'd lie in bed at night and feel like I was missing something, some deeper part of myself I couldn't quite reach. I didn't know how to get back to it. I didn't even know what it was. And the truth is, it's hard to find yourself when you're still clinging to an image of who you think you're supposed to be, because that image takes up space. It's loud. It demands your attention. It gets praised, reinforced, complimented. And because of that, it becomes addicting. But it's not the real you. The real you is the one who laughs a little too loudly when something genuinely delights you. The one who cries when something moves you, even if it's inconvenient or messy. The one who cares deeply, even when it's not logical. The one who's been quietly waiting beneath the roles and responsibilities, wondering if it's ever going to be safe to come out. You don't find that version of yourself by pushing harder to become better. You find them by letting go of the script, letting go of the polished image, letting go of the pressure to always say the right thing, or be the strong one, or make everyone else comfortable. You find yourself when you give yourself permission to stop performing, to stop chasing approval, to stop trying to outrun the parts of you that feel inconvenient, flawed, or too much. I remember the first time I really let go, just a little. I was in a conversation with someone I trusted, and instead of saying what I thought I should, I told the truth. A quiet, vulnerable truth. Something like, I don't have it all figured out. And the moment those words left my mouth, I felt both terrified and free. I expected judgment, but what I got instead was connection. And that's what's so powerful about letting go of who you're supposed to be. You make room for who you really are. And when you do that, people can finally see you. Not the version you carefully crafted, but the real you. And oddly enough, that's the one they were hoping to meet all along. The more I leaned into that version of myself, the unfiltered, imperfect, deeply human one, the more I started to feel at home in my own life. I didn't have to act anymore. I didn't have to constantly manage people's perceptions of me. I could breathe. I could just be. And that brought a peace I'd been chasing for years. It also brought grief, because letting go of who you thought you were supposed to be often means grieving the person you tried so hard to become, the one who was so good at adapting, so good at earning love, so good at keeping things together. That version of you wasn't fake. They were doing their best with what they knew. They were trying to protect you. But now, it's safe to let them rest. It's safe to stop striving and start becoming. Not the ideal version of yourself, but the truest one. The one who laughs at the wrong moments. The one who feels deeply. The one who still believes in magic, or writes poetry in secret, or finds beauty in strange places. The one you might have hidden to survive, but who's always been there, waiting to come home. You don't need to earn the right to be yourself. You already are. You don't need to become more lovable, more efficient, more impressive, to deserve your own acceptance. You just need to return to yourself, gently, honestly, one breath at a time. So if you've been feeling disconnected, like something in you is missing, maybe it's not something you need to find out in the world. Maybe it's someone you need to stop pretending to be. And maybe, just maybe, the more you let go of who you thought you had to be, the more you remember who you've been all along. And when that remembering happens, something else opens too. A deeper kind of growth. One that doesn't come from pushing, striving, or planning, but from surrender, from trust, from stepping into the unknown before you feel ready. Because here comes the next paradox. You grow the most when you feel the least ready. There's this quiet myth we carry. It's one that whispers, you'll grow when you're ready. Like readiness is some magical doorway that opens only when you've figured it all out, when you're confident, when you have a plan, when the timing is right, the stars align, and everything inside you feels steady. But life doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't wait for your permission. It doesn't wait until you're fully prepared, until you feel brave, until you've read every book and mapped every step. In fact, if you look back at the times in your life when you changed the most, really changed, deep in your bones, it probably wasn't when things were comfortable or convenient. It was when you were scared, uncertain, barely holding it together. It was when you felt completely not ready. And yet, you moved anyway. That's the paradox. You grow the most when you feel the least ready. Because growth doesn't begin when you feel safe. It begins when you're willing to step into the unknown, despite not feeling ready. I remember one moment in particular, a decision I had to make that felt way too big for me. I was offered something, an opportunity, a turning point, and every part of me screamed, "You're not ready. You'll mess this up. You're not qualified." I almost said no, not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't trust myself with it. And then someone close to me said something simple. Maybe readiness isn't a feeling. Maybe it's a choice. That stuck with me, because so often we wait for the fear to go away before we take the leap. But fear doesn't always leave. It lingers at the edges. It follows us into new rooms, and the only way through it is to move forward with it. I said yes that day. My voice shook. My hands were cold. My mind raced with all the ways I might fail. But underneath all of that was a quieter knowing. A part of me that was tired of shrinking, tired of waiting to feel ready for my own life. So I stepped in, and yes, it was messy. I stumbled, I doubted, I made mistakes. But I also grew, fast, deep, in ways I never would have discovered had I waited until I felt ready. Because the truth is, readiness isn't a feeling. It's a moment when you decide to stop postponing who you're becoming. It's saying, I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try anyway. And something amazing happens when you do. You find out that you're more capable than you thought. You find parts of yourself you didn't know existed. You realize that courage isn't something you feel before. It's something you build by walking forward in the dark. Growth comes in moments that stretch you, that ask more of you than you thought you could give, that shake up your identity just enough to make room for something new. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes growth is quietly deciding to show up for yourself, even when your confidence is low. Sometimes it's getting out of bed when everything inside you says stay hidden. Sometimes it's telling the truth. Sometimes it's walking away. And in almost all of those moments, you won't feel ready. You'll feel uncertain, vulnerable. But underneath that, you'll also feel alive. Because the edge of your comfort zone is where you remember what you're made of. It's where you trade certainty for expansion, and where fear slowly gets replaced with trust, not in the outcome, but in yourself. And that's the kind of growth that lasts, the kind that shapes how you move through the world, the kind that doesn't just improve you, it reveals you. It unearths the version of you that's been waiting beneath all the hesitation. We think we need more time, more confidence, more clarity before we begin. But more often, What we really need is to begin, to take the first shaky step, to say yes to something that scares us a little, to believe that maybe we're not behind, maybe we're just on the edge of something beautiful, and maybe the fear you feel isn't a sign that you're not ready. Maybe it's a sign that you're right there, right where you're supposed to be. I've seen this in so many people. The mother who didn't feel ready to raise a child, but grew into one of the most deeply loving parents I've ever known. The friend who was terrified to start over in a new city, and now can't imagine having stayed. The artist who sat on her work for years, convinced it wasn't good enough, until the day she shared it anyway, and changed lives with it. None of them felt ready, but they showed up, and that's what made the difference. So if you're in a moment right now, where life is asking more of you than you feel prepared for, if something in you is trembling at the edge of a decision, a dream, a change, you're not failing, you're growing, and maybe you can't see it yet. Maybe all you feel is the fear, the doubt, the mess, but in time you'll look back and realize this was the moment you began to become, not because you had it all figured out, but because you dared to move anyway. And here's the gentle truth. There is no perfect time to begin, but every moment you choose yourself over your fear, every time you say, even though I don't feel ready, I'm still going, you are growing into the person you were always meant to be. And that version of you, they're already proud of you, not for doing it perfectly, but for simply showing up, because that's what real growth looks like. It looks like trembling hands and a steady heart. It looks like confusion and courage sharing the same breath. It looks like saying, maybe I don't need to be ready to rise. And when you rise shaky, imperfect, but still rising, you give others permission to rise too. And that's the next beautiful paradox. The happiest people embrace sadness too. We tend to think of happiness and sadness as opposites, as if one cancels out the other, as if to be truly happy, you have to banish sadness, push it away, replace it, bury it, under gratitude journals and motivational quotes, smile through it, or rise above it. But that's not how real happiness works. That's how performing happiness works. And performing is exhausting. Real happiness, the kind that lasts, the kind that lives deep in your bones, isn't about never feeling sad. It's about not being afraid of sadness anymore. It's about making space for it, allowing it, and understanding that sometimes the very people who laugh the hardest are the ones who've cried the deepest. I used to think something was wrong with me because my joy never lasted long. I'd feel happy for a while, after a good day, a kind word, a moment of connection, and then suddenly, sadness would sneak back in, like a fog rolling through a sunny field, and I'd get frustrated. I'd ask myself, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just stay happy? But I was asking the wrong question. Sadness wasn't the problem. My resistance to sadness was, because happiness doesn't mean living without sadness. It means learning how to live with it, how to hold both at once. It's sitting at the dinner table, laughing with your best friend, and feeling a quiet ache, because someone who's no longer here used to sit there too. It's feeling grateful for where you are, and still feeling the pull of something that didn't work out. It's waking up with hope, and still carrying the weight of a loss you haven't fully made peace with. And it doesn't make you broken, it makes you whole, because emotions don't cancel each other out. They live beside each other, they take turns, they hold hands. And some of the richest, most meaningful moments in life happen in the in-between space, the space where joy and sorrow are both invited. I once met a woman at a retreat, older, soft-spoken with kind eyes. She told me her life had been filled with deep sorrow, the kind that leaves a mark, the kind that changes the way you walk through the world. And yet, she radiated light, gentle laughter, a warmth that made people feel safe. When I asked her how she kept that spark alive, even with all she had carried, she said, I stopped running from my sadness. I let it sit beside me now. And in doing that, I found more room for joy. That sentence lives inside me now, because I believe that's where true happiness is born, from inclusion, not avoidance. When we deny sadness, we don't actually protect ourselves. We just numb, we push things down, we fake okayness, and eventually, that sadness leaks out sideways, through irritability, disconnection, anxiety, exhaustion. But when we allow it, when we sit with it, listen to it, hold it like we would hold a crying child, it softens, and something beautiful happens. We become more alive. We stop chasing happiness like a destination, and start experiencing it as something that weaves itself into the fullness of our emotional lives. Some of the happiest people I know are also the most tender. They cry during movies. They grieve deeply. They feel things fully. And because of that, their joy is real. It's not manufactured. It's not performative. It's rooted in a deep understanding of what it means to be human. They know that life isn't always light, but they choose to look for the light anyway, not because they're ignoring the darkness, but because they've made peace with it. And that kind of happiness, it doesn't depend on the day going well. It doesn't vanish when sadness shows up. It stays, it breathes, it holds you when you feel broken, and it reminds you that even in grief, there's still beauty, still warmth, still a reason to laugh, even if your eyes are wet. You don't have to wait for sadness to pass to feel happiness again. They can coexist. They do, all the time. I once went to a memorial service for someone dearly loved. There were tears, of course there were, but there was also so much laughter, story after story that made people laugh until they cried again. There was dancing, there was singing, there was life, right there in the middle of loss. And I remember thinking, this is it, this is the human experience. Bitter and sweet, broken and beautiful, all at once. You don't have to choose between them. You can love your life and still feel sorrow. You can be grateful and still be grieving. You can wake up smiling and still carry an ache in your heart that never fully goes away. That's not contradiction, that's depth. And the deeper you go, the more room you have for joy, not the surface kind, but the kind that feels like sunlight in your chest after a long winter. So if you're someone who feels deeply, who cries easily, who walks through the world with your heart open wide, don't ever think that makes you less happy. It might actually mean you have more capacity for happiness, because you're not blocking anything out. You're living in the fullness of what it means to feel, and that's where the magic is. Real happiness isn't about escaping the hard parts. It's about letting them shape you, stretch you, soften you, and still choosing to smile anyway. So no, the happiest people aren't the ones who've never felt pain. They're the ones who have, and kept their hearts open anyway. And when you learn to live that way, to let all your emotions belong, something else becomes possible too. You stop waiting to feel fearless before you act. You stop needing to eliminate doubt or erase discomfort. You realize that bravery isn't about being unaffected. It's about being afraid and showing up anyway. Which brings us to the next paradox. Courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. For a long time, I thought courage meant not being afraid. I knew that brave people were just built differently, that they had some inner superpower I didn't have, some natural immunity to fear. I imagined them walking into hard conversations, uncertain futures, and impossible challenges, with steady hands and clear eyes, untouched by the shakiness I so often felt. But that version of courage is a myth. Real courage doesn't show up when you feel ready, when you're full of confidence, when everything inside you says, go. It shows up in spite of all that, or maybe even because of it. It shows up when you feel afraid, and you move forward anyway. That's what makes it brave. Courage is that quiet, trembling voice that says, I don't know how this will turn out, but I'm going to try. It's not the absence of fear. It's the decision that fear doesn't get to be in charge. I've felt that kind of fear many times. The kind that knots your stomach and tightens your throat. The kind that makes your mind spiral with everything that could go wrong. The kind that tells you to stay where it's safe, even when something deeper inside you is begging for more. The first time I stood up to speak in front of a group, my legs were shaking so badly, I thought they might give out. I had rehearsed every word. I had gone over it again and again, but when I stood there, facing real people, real eyes looking back at me, my confidence evaporated. All that was left was fear. And yet, I spoke. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but I got through it. And afterward, someone came up to me and said, you looked so calm up there. I almost laughed, because the outside didn't match the inside at all. But that's the thing about courage. It's often invisible. People don't see the fear you felt walking through the door. They see that you showed up. And that's the win. You showed up. You didn't let fear shut you down. You didn't wait to be fearless. You just moved, step by shaky step. And that choice, that motion, is what builds strength. I've come to understand that fear isn't the enemy. It's just a signal. It tells you you're stepping into something that matters, something uncertain, something vulnerable. And that's okay. Fear will always be part of the equation when you care deeply about something, but it doesn't have to be the thing that decides for you. You can feel afraid and still say what needs to be said. You can feel afraid and still take the leap. You can feel afraid and still choose yourself. I've seen people do this in the most beautiful ways. A friend who finally ended a relationship that had been slowly dimming her light. She cried through it. She second-guessed herself, but she did it. And on the other side was the kind of peace she didn't even know she was missing. Another friend started over at 40. New job, new city, safety net. She was terrified, but she also felt something else. Aliveness, that kind of electric energy that only comes when you're doing something that requires all of you, something that stretches you. That's what courage does. It stretches you, and every time you act with courage, no matter how small, it rewrites the story you tell yourself. The story that says, I can't, I'm not ready, I'm not strong enough. Because now you have proof. You did the thing, even while afraid. And slowly, you start to trust yourself more. You stop waiting to feel fearless, and you start building a life where fear can ride in the back seat, but it doesn't get to drive. You speak up, even if your voice shakes. You show your heart, even if it's been hurt. You begin again, even if you failed last time. And that is where your power lives. Not in pretending you're unshakable, but in choosing to move forward while you shake. That's what makes your story real. That's what makes your courage count. And here's the thing, your courage doesn't have to look like anyone else's. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be dramatic. Sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is simply to stay, or to leave, or to try again, or to rest when you'd rather run. Courage is deeply personal, and no one else gets to measure yours. So if you're afraid right now, that's okay. If the next step looks big, if your knees feel weak, if your voice is quiet, that doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're standing right at the edge of something that matters. And you don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes, all it takes is one breath, one step, one yes. And from there, things begin to open. And as they open, you start to notice something else. That fear doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. Because on the other side of fear, you might find freedom. On the other side of fear, you might find your voice. On the other side of fear, you might just find yourself. And from that place, raw, real, awake, you begin to realize something else. That joy, true joy, doesn't always begin in comfort. Sometimes, it starts in pain. Sometimes, it grows from the very place you thought would break you. And that brings us to the next paradox. The road to joy often starts with accepting pain. It's a strange thing to say out loud, that joy and pain are connected. Most of us grow up thinking they're opposites. That one cancels out the other. But if you want joy, you need to move away from pain. Heal it, fix it, ignore it. Just get past it, as fast as you can. But I've come to learn that joy isn't what you feel, instead of pain. Sometimes, joy is what you find through it. And I don't mean that in a poetic, abstract way. I mean it literally. The deepest joy I've ever felt has come after moments of heartbreak, surrender, and raw, aching honesty. Because the truth is, you can't feel joy fully if your heart is locked up. And pain has a way of breaking your heart open, not to destroy you, but to make room for something real. I used to be afraid of pain. I thought if I let it get too close, it would swallow me. So I did what a lot of people do. I avoided it, distracted myself, smiled when I didn't mean it, said I was fine, even when my chest felt like it was carrying the weight of something I couldn't name. But the thing about pain is, it doesn't just go away when you ignore it. It waits, quietly, in the background. And over time, if you keep pushing it down, it hardens, turns into resentment, numbness, a low hum of disconnection that follows you everywhere, even in moments that are supposed to be joyful. That's what started to happen to me. I remember sitting at a friend's wedding once, surrounded by laughter and music, and dancing, and feeling nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I was so afraid to feel too much. Afraid that if I opened the door to anything, the pain I'd been carrying would rush in and take over. And so I stayed closed. But here's what I've learned. You can't selectively numb emotions. When you block pain, you block joy, too. When you avoid grief, you dull your capacity for gratitude. When you refuse to feel loss, you also lose access to love. It's all connected. And so the only way back to joy is through the sadness, through the fear, through the moments that make you want to curl up and disappear. Not because those moments are joyful, but because on the other side of allowing them, you come out clearer, softer, more alive. I remember the first time I really let myself feel pain, not manage it, not explain it, not turn it into a lesson or a story, just feel it. It was after someone I loved walked away, not in anger, but in distance, in silence. And for weeks, I told myself I was okay, that it wasn't a big deal, that people leave, and that's just how it goes. But one night, I was sitting alone, and a song came on that cracked something in me. I stopped pretending. I stopped performing strength, and I cried, fully, without a script, without trying to stop it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was with myself again. Not the version of me who had it all together, but the one who knew how to feel deeply, and it hurt. But it also healed something. It reminded me that I was still here, that I still cared, that even though my heart had been bruised, it was still beating. And that in itself was a kind of joy, not the fireworks kind, but the quiet, holy kind, the kind that whispers, you're still alive, and you still have love left to give. That's when it started to shift. I began to understand that pain isn't always a problem to solve. Sometimes it's a doorway. Sometimes it's the very thing that carves out the space inside you where joy can take root. Because joy isn't just about feeling good, it's about feeling everything, and letting that make you more human, not less. I've met people who carry so much pain, and still shine with a kind of light that's hard to describe. You can tell they've walked through fire, not because they're bitter, but because they're open, because their sorrow has softened them, not hardened them, because they know what it means to suffer, and they still choose to laugh, to dance, to love again. That's the kind of joy that lasts, the kind that doesn't disappear when life gets hard again, the kind that holds hands with sadness and says, we both belong here. So if you're in a season of pain right now, please don't rush through it. Don't try to skip to the part where it all makes sense. Stay with yourself. Let the tears come. Let the confusion live in the room. Let the anger rise and pass. And trust that underneath all of it, something beautiful is quietly forming. You might not see it yet, but it's there. It's in your willingness to be honest, to break open, to begin again. Because every time you allow yourself to feel, really feel, you grow, you heal, and you clear space for something lighter, something brighter, to find its way back in. That's how joy returns. Not when the pain is gone, but when you stop turning away from it. When you start saying this hurts, and I'm still here. That's where it begins. That's where you begin. And as you open that door, slowly, gently, you'll start to notice something else emerging. A sense of gratitude. Not forced, not rehearsed. Just a quiet appreciation for what remains. For what the pain has shown you. For the strength you didn't know you had. For the love that never really left. Which brings us to the next beautiful paradox. Gratitude turns what you have into more than enough. There's something about gratitude that almost sounds too simple. It's one of those words we hear so often that it starts to feel like a cliché. Or be grateful. Count your blessings. Appreciate what you have. It's printed on coffee mugs and stitched onto pillows. It's the advice people give when they don't know what else to say. But the truth is, real gratitude, deep, grounded, felt in your bones gratitude, isn't cheesy. It's life-changing. It shifts everything. And not because it changes your circumstances, but because it changes you. You used to think gratitude was a response to something going well. You say thank you when you get what you want. You feel grateful when life is generous. When things are peaceful, when the people you love are healthy, when your plans work out. But then I lived through seasons where very little went right, where things fell apart, where the people I counted on disappeared, where the future felt like fog. And in those moments, I thought gratitude had no place. I thought it belonged to happier, more put-together versions of life. But slowly, I started to notice something surprising. Even on the worst days, something small would glimmer. The warmth of sunlight through a window, the comfort of a blanket I'd had since childhood, a single line from a book that felt like it was written just for me, the sound of someone's laugh, a deep breath, a cup of tea, the fact that somehow, my heart was still beating. And when I let myself feel that, really feel it, something inside me softened. Not because everything was suddenly okay, but because I remembered that not everything was broken. There were still pieces of beauty in the rubble. Gratitude didn't fix my pain. It helped me carry it. It reminded me that even in the middle of what felt like not enough, there was still something, something to hold on to, something to keep me grounded, something to whisper, keep going. That's the quiet power of gratitude. It doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't ask you to pretend. It doesn't ignore the hurt. It simply says, look again, look at what's still here, look at what's holding you, look at the small things that survived the storm. And suddenly what once felt like not enough starts to feel full. I remember a time when I was struggling with comparison. I'd scroll through social media and see other people's lives, looking shinier, more exciting, more meaningful. It made me question mine, made me feel small, like I was falling behind. But one day, I closed my laptop, stepped outside, and sat on the steps with a journal. I wrote down 5 things that didn't look like much, but mattered deeply to me. The sound of birds, the way my dog always waits for me at the door, the way my mum says my name, the tree outside my window that changes with the seasons, the way I laugh when I'm with certain people and forget to care how I sound. None of it was spectacular, but in that moment, it felt sacred. I didn't need more. I just needed to see what I already had. That's the gift of gratitude. It doesn't require you to add anything. It invites you to notice what's already there. And the moment you do, the moment you pause and see your life, not for what it's missing, but for what it holds, you begin to feel full. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped waiting for perfect to begin living. I think sometimes we chase more so hard that we forget to receive what's right in front of us. We get so focused on what's next that we overlook what's now. And gratitude brings us back to the present, to the enoughness of this moment. It says, this life right here, right now, is worthy of love. And the more you practice it, not perform it, but really practice it, the more it becomes a lens through which you see the world. You begin to find beauty in unlikely places. You begin to feel rich in ways that have nothing to do with money. You begin to understand that having it all was never the goal. The goal was always to notice what matters most, and to let that be enough. And something beautiful happens when you do. You stop clinging, you stop rushing, you stop waiting for life to impress you. You just begin to live, you begin to receive life. And in that receiving, you find a quiet joy, a steady kind of contentment, the kind that doesn't disappear when things get hard, but becomes a soft place to land. And that's what makes gratitude so powerful. It doesn't ignore reality, it just widens your view of it. And in that wider view, there's more room for peace, more room for softness, more room for enough. So if today feels ordinary, if it feels like you're waiting for something bigger, pause, look around, breathe it in. This moment, this body, this breath, it's all a gift. And the more you see that, the more life begins to feel rich, not in the way the world defines it, but in the way your soul recognizes. Because once you stop measuring your life by what you lack and start naming what you love, something shifts. Gratitude turns what you have into more than enough. And from that place of enoughness, something else begins to open in you, a softening toward the past, a readiness to forgive, not just others, but yourself. And that leads us gently into the next paradox. Forgiveness heals the one who gives it. Forgiveness is one of those words that feels heavier the longer you look at it. It sounds simple when you say it out loud. Just let it go. But when you've been hurt deeply, it's anything but simple. It's tangled, emotional. It stirs up memories you thought you had boxed up long ago. And it asks something of you that can feel impossible. To release what someone never apologized for. To loosen your grip on a story that still aches. And for a long time, I misunderstood forgiveness. I thought it was about making peace with them, the person who caused the pain, that it meant pretending it didn't hurt, or excusing what happened, or telling myself it didn't really matter anymore. I thought forgiving someone meant they got away with it. But I've come to understand something different, something quieter, more powerful. Forgiveness isn't about freeing them, it's about freeing you. It's not about saying what they did was okay. It's about saying, I no longer want to carry this pain inside me. Because holding on to resentment, betrayal, and anger, it costs you. It weighs you down. It colors the way you see the world. It leaks into other relationships. It steals space in your heart, where joy could live. And sometimes, the person you're holding all that weight for, they've already walked away, or they've forgotten, or they've never once looked back. So the pain stays, only now. It's not something they're doing to you. It's something you're doing to yourself. And that's where forgiveness begins. Not with them, but with a quiet moment, when you finally ask, why am I still bleeding from a wound they no longer touch? I remember the first time I truly forgave someone who never said sorry. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big conversation or closure scene. It happened in the stillness of a Tuesday morning, years after the hurt. I was making coffee, and I caught myself thinking about them again, about what I would say if I had the chance, how I'd finally get it all off my chest. And in that moment, something inside me sighed, like a tired, worn-out voice just said, enough. I didn't want to rehearse that pain anymore. I didn't want to give it more airtime in my mind. I didn't want it shaping who I was becoming, so I let it go. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. Because I was ready to stop letting the past write my future. Because I wanted peace more than I wanted revenge. Forgiveness is a kind of courage. It's choosing to no longer let your story be driven by what broke you. And sometimes, the person you need to forgive is yourself. That might be the hardest one. To forgive yourself for not knowing better, for staying too long, for walking away too soon, for saying the wrong thing, for not saying anything, for how you coped, for how you survived. There's a part of you that's still carrying that guilt, still trying to pay off a debt with self-punishment. But that debt was never yours to carry forever. You've already paid enough through the pain you've felt, through the nights you've replayed it, over and over, through the growth you've done in the shadows. Self-forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It means you finally tell that younger version of you, I see you, I know you tried, and I'm not going to keep punishing you for doing your best with what you had. That kind of forgiveness toward others, toward yourself, isn't a single act. It's a practice. Sometimes you'll forgive and feel lighter instantly. Other times you'll need to forgive again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until the grip loosens. But slowly, it does. Slowly you start breathing deeper. You stop flinching at the memory. You start noticing that the pain is no longer the loudest voice in the room. And in its place, space, softness, a chance to rebuild without the weight of what broke you. That's what forgiveness gives you. Not perfection, not a rewrite of the past, but permission to live forward, to reclaim your joy, to love without armor, to stop defining yourself by what hurt you. And here's something else I've learned. The strongest people I know are not the ones who never felt hurt. They're the ones who learned how to feel it, carry it, and still choose to let go. Not because they forgot, but because they refused to let that pain become their identity. They wanted more for themselves, and so they chose peace. And when you choose peace, again and again, your heart starts to open again. You begin to trust life more. You begin to trust yourself more. And from that space of openness, you start making different decisions. You start protecting your peace. You stop explaining your worth. You stop saying yes out of guilt. You start saying no, not to be rude, not to reject others, but because you finally learned that your energy, your heart, your time are sacred. And that leads us right into the next paradox. Saying no opens space for the right. Yes, for much of my life, I struggled to say no. It wasn't because I didn't have boundaries. I just didn't know how to honor them without guilt. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want to seem selfish. I wanted to be kind, to be accommodating, to be easy to love. So I said yes. Even when my body said no. Even when my heart whispered, this doesn't feel right. Even when everything in me was begging for space. I thought saying yes made me a good person. Someone who was helpful, generous, flexible, someone people could count on. But over time, all those yeses started to pile up, and they weren't rooted in truth. They were rooted in fear. Fear of disappointing people, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing connection. And here's the thing about saying yes when you really mean no. It creates a life filled with obligations, not alignment. It fills your calendar, but empties your spirit. It stretches you thin. It makes you resentful. And eventually, it leaves no room for the things that actually matter to you. That's what I started to notice. That by always saying yes to others, I was quietly saying no to myself, no to rest, no to creativity, no to the version of me who needed breathing room. And after a while, I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was showing up everywhere, except for my own life. That's when I started learning a different way. I remember the first time I said no, and didn't explain it. It was to something small, a social event I didn't have energy for, but it felt monumental. I wrote the message, erased it, rewrote it again. I added a reason, then I deleted it. Then I added another one. But in the end, I sent just this thank you for the invitation. I can't make it, but I appreciate you thinking of me. That was it. And no one was angry. No one needed me to justify it. The world didn't collapse. What did happen was subtle but profound. I felt a small wave of relief, of empowerment, like I had finally taken a tiny piece of my life back. Because when you say no, with honesty and kindness, you're not closing a door, you're opening one. You're creating space. Space for rest. Space for joy. Space for the things that truly align with who you are. And that's what this paradox is all about. That saying no isn't rejection. It's refinement. It's clarity. It's choosing not just any life, but your life. Of course, it doesn't always feel easy, especially if you're someone who grew up equating love with sacrifice. Especially if you've been praised for being the strong one, the yes person, the one who always shows up. But the truth is, love rooted in self-abandonment isn't really love. It's performance. It's survival. And you deserve more than that. You deserve love that doesn't require you to disappear. And that starts by learning to say no when your soul needs you to. It might be uncomfortable at first. You might feel guilty. That's okay. Guilt is just the residue of an old pattern, trying to survive. But with time, that guilt fades and in its place grows something stronger. Integrity, alignment. A quiet kind of power that says, I trust myself to choose what's right for me. I once heard someone say that every yes is also a no. When you say yes to something that drains you, you're saying no to something that might nourish you. When you say yes to staying silent, you're saying no to your truth. When you say yes out of guilt, you're saying no to your freedom. So the question isn't just what are you saying yes to, but what are you saying no to, by default? And what if by saying no to what no longer fits, you create space for something better, something more honest, more beautiful, more you? Because once you start protecting your time, your energy, your heart, you begin to see life differently. You stop running, you stop proving, you start listening, you start choosing with care, and slowly, your life begins to reflect who you really are. Not who you were taught to be, not who you think others want you to be, but you. You say no to the role you've outgrown, and yes to the one that feels like home. You say no to the chaos, and yes to the quiet. You say no to urgency, and yes to presence. And in that presence, you begin to discover something remarkable, that much of what you were chasing, you already had. You just didn't have space to feel it. Joy, peace, creativity, love. They were there all along, waiting for you to clear a path. And the more space you create, the more you realize how little you actually need, how much is already here, how enoughness isn't found in doing more, but in needing less. Which leads us, gently and naturally, to the next paradox. You receive more by needing less. We live in a world that constantly tells us we need more success, more attention, more followers, more stuff, more certainty, more goals, more doing. And if we don't have more, we're told it's because we're not trying hard enough, not focused enough, not worthy enough, not enough, period. So we strive, we reach, we hustle, we keep moving towards something, believing that once we have enough, we'll finally feel full. But here's the part no one tells you. The more you're chasing doesn't always lead to fullness. In fact, it often leads to the opposite. Because the more we need, the more we fear losing. The more we need, the more we feel behind. The more we need, the more we forget to actually receive what's already right in front of us. I didn't understand this at first. I thought wanting more meant ambition, passion, drive. And in some ways it did. There's nothing wrong with growth or desire, or building something meaningful, but somewhere along the way, my desire for more began to disconnect me from what was, from what already was enough. I would get something I had worked hard for, and within days my mind would already be asking, what's next? I couldn't even enjoy it. I was so focused on the next mountain that I missed the view from the one I had just climbed. That's when I started to question the whole structure of my striving. What if needing less didn't mean settling? What if it actually meant creating more space to receive, not just materially, but emotionally, spiritually, internally? What I found was this: the less I needed to prove, the more I received peace. The less I needed to control, the more I received trust. The less I needed to chase validation, the more I received genuine connection. Because when your hands are clenched in pursuit, you miss what's trying to land softly in your open palms. It's strange, isn't it? How tightly we hold on to the idea that we don't have enough. How deeply we believe we need to earn love, to earn rest, to earn time. As if being here, being alive, isn't already enough of a reason to be held, to be supported, to be still. But when you start to loosen that grip, even a little, something beautiful begins to happen. You look around and you realize you have so much, not just things but moments, people, lessons, quiet gifts that don't scream for your attention, but are always there, waiting for you to notice. You start to feel the sun on your face again. You start to hear the way the world breathes when you're not rushing through it. You start to feel the love that's been waiting for you, not out in some distant future, but here, in the gentle presence of now. And that love isn't loud. It doesn't chase you down. It waits for you to stop running long enough to receive it. That's what this paradox is about. You receive more, not by wanting more, or needing more, or proving more, but by needing less, by softening, by slowing, by opening, by remembering that enough isn't something you find at the end of the race. Enough is something you notice when you stop running from yourself. I remember a conversation I had with someone who lived a life very different from mine. He had few possessions, lived in a modest home, didn't have much of what the world would call success, but he was calm, rooted, radiant, even. And I asked him what made him feel rich. He smiled and said, "Because I'm not constantly afraid of losing something. I already have everything I need." That answer stayed with me, because I've known people with everything, and they still feel like it's not enough. I've been that person. Maybe you have too. But the shift happens when we stop looking outward for our sense of fullness and start turning inward. When we realize that needing less isn't about lack, it's about liberation. Freedom from the grip of comparison. Freedom from the trap of when I have this, then I'll be happy. Freedom from the idea that more is the answer to every ache. Because sometimes the ache isn't about what's missing, it's about what we've been ignoring. And when we stop reaching so hard, we can begin to receive again. We receive the moment. We receive the quiet. We receive ourselves. And in doing so, we begin to live a different kind of life. Not one built on scarcity, but one built on enoughness. Not one driven by urgency, but one guided by intention. Not one filled with more noise, but with more meaning. And in that life, we start noticing beauty in places we used to overlook. We stop waiting for joy to arrive in the form of some big achievement, and instead, we find it in the smallest of things, the way someone says your name, the way your body still carries you, even on the hard days, the sound of laughter, the taste of something warm. These things, simple as they are, begin to feel sacred, because they're received, not chased. And the more you live that way, the more you begin to see that the best parts of life aren't found in excess. They're found in presence, in simplicity, in the choice to say, this is enough. And from that space of grounded enoughness, you become lighter, freer, more generous. Because now, you're not pouring from emptiness, you're pouring from wholeness. And when you live from that place, you're no longer afraid to look back. You no longer carry shame like it's part of your identity. You begin to open your arms to everything you've been, everything you've done, and finally start to forgive the parts you used to hide. Which brings us gently to the next paradox. The more you accept your past, the freer you become. The past has a way of following us. Sometimes it's quiet, like background noise we've grown used to. Other times it's loud, a memory that shows up uninvited in the middle of an otherwise good day. A song, a scent, a place you used to go, and suddenly you're back in a version of your life you thought you'd left behind. And if we're not careful, we spend so much of the present trying to rewrite or outrun what already happened, as if with just enough thinking, or guilt, or regret, we could somehow change it. I know that feeling well. I used to carry my past like armor, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do with it. The mistakes, the missed chances, the people I hurt, the people who hurt me. I kept them all close, like proof that I was flawed, that I needed to work harder, do better, be better. And I thought that was how you grow, by holding on to every moment that went wrong, and keeping it close enough to remind you, don't mess up again. But that's not growth, that's self-imprisonment. Because when you define yourself by your past, you're not really living, you're just surviving, reacting, shrinking. You're constantly looking backward, measuring who you are now against someone you no longer are. And that's the paradox. You don't become free by forgetting your past, you become free by accepting it, not erasing it, not rewriting it, just making peace with it. That means sitting down with all the versions of you that once felt too hard to face. The younger you who didn't know better, the angry you, the scared you, the one who stayed too long, the one who left too soon, the one who said too much, or said nothing when it mattered. You don't need to punish those parts of you. You need to understand them. You need to say, I know why you did what you did. I know you were doing the best you could with what you had. Because most of the time, that's the truth. We did our best, even if that best looks messy now. Even if, in hindsight, we would have chosen differently. Acceptance doesn't mean you approve of everything that's happened. It just means you stop fighting with it. You stop giving it the power to define who you are today. I once heard someone say, you can't change the past, but you can change your relationship to it. That clicked something in me, because for so long, I had this idea that if I just processed enough, I could somehow fix the past, that there was a version of me in the past I could reach back to and whisper, don't go there, don't say that, don't trust them, don't be so naive. But I can't. None of us can. What I can do though, is sit here, now, and hold that younger version of me with compassion. I can say, you didn't ruin your life, you were learning, and it's okay to move forward now. And that's where freedom lives. It lives in the choice to stop reliving the same regret. It lives in the moment you decide to stop punishing yourself for not knowing, then what you know now. It lives in the quiet sigh of relief that comes when you finally let go of the question, what if, and start asking, what now? Because here's something we forget. The person you are today, the one who's wiser, softer, stronger, only exists because of the path you've walked. And that includes the stumbles, the detours, the heartbreaks, the versions of you that were lost and learning, and trying so hard, just to stay afloat. You don't get to where you are without all of that. And you can't grow without roots, even if they're messy, even if they're tangled, even if some of them live in the dark. So instead of trying to pull them out or pretend they never happened, maybe it's time to bless them, to say, thank you for getting me here. That's what acceptance really is. It's not passive, it's not resignation, it's power, it's ownership. It's saying, this is my story, all of it, and I'm no longer ashamed of where I come from. Because when you stop hiding from your past, it stops holding power over you. And in that release, you find a freedom you didn't even realize you were missing. You start showing up more fully. You start trusting yourself again. You start letting people see the real you, not just the polished parts, but the full story. And in doing that, you give others permission to do the same. Because let's be honest, we all carry something. A version of ourselves we're still trying to forgive. A chapter we rarely talk about. A scar we think disqualifies us from being whole. But the truth is, those scars are what make you real. They're not a sign of failure. They're a sign of healing. And the more you accept them, the less afraid you become of being seen. The more you tell the truth about your story, the more you realize it's worth telling. And in that space, in that acceptance, something beautiful begins to unfold. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop trying to prove anything. You simply live with honesty, with softness, with space to breathe. And from that space, something else starts to grow, not from the past, but from right here, in this moment. A new sense of curiosity, of openness, of wonder. Because once you've made peace with the story behind you, you can finally start exploring the questions ahead of you. Which brings us into our next paradox. You discover more when you admit you don't know. There's something oddly comforting about being the one with the answers. It makes you feel in control, grounded, safe, like you're holding the map, while everyone else is still trying to figure out where they are. And for a long time, I held tight to that feeling. I thought being sure was a kind of strength. I thought having certainty meant I was doing life right. But at some point, that certainty began to feel like a cage. Because the more I clung to what I thought I knew, the less open I became to new ideas, to different people, to the possibility that I could be wrong, or that something even better might be waiting on the other side of my assumptions. That's when I started to learn something surprising. You don't discover more by knowing more. You discover more by admitting you don't know. And that might sound strange in a world that glorifies confidence and certainty. But I've found that real growth, real connection, and real magic begin the moment we loosen our grip on needing to have it all figured out. Because the truth is, most of us are just trying. We're navigating life with maps that were handed to us by parents, teachers, society, maps drawn decades ago, often with roads that no longer exist. And yet, we keep following them, afraid of what it would mean to admit we're lost, afraid of what people might think if we said, actually, I don't know. But here's the thing, not knowing isn't weakness, it's openness, it's curiosity, it's where all discovery begins. When you let go of needing to be right, you make room for real learning. When you admit you don't know, people are more willing to open up to you too. There's a shared honesty that forms when no one is pretending. I remember a conversation I had with someone much older and wiser than me. I asked a question I thought would have a clear answer. Instead, he smiled and said, I used to know the answer to that. Then life humbled me. That line landed deep. Because sometimes the most profound truths aren't found in clarity. They're found in wonder, in the willingness to admit, I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will, but I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm willing to keep learning. It's a kind of surrender, a gentle release of ego, and it opens up so much. You start asking better questions. You start seeing things you used to overlook. You become less concerned with being impressive, and more focused on being present. It's funny how children are like this by nature. They ask why 100 times a day. They're not afraid of curiosity. They're not embarrassed by wonder. But somewhere along the way, we're taught that not knowing makes us look foolish. So we hide it. We nod along, we fake understanding, we pretend we've read the book, seen the movie, figured out the plan, and in doing so we close doors. But the moment you let that go, the moment you say, I'm not sure, or I've never thought of it that way, or is it I'd like to learn more, something shifts. You begin to live like a student again, not in the sense of needing grades or validation, but in the sense of being awake, engaged, open to being surprised. And that openness, it creates connection, it builds trust, it keeps your spirit agile. It gives you the ability to grow without shame. Some of the most inspiring people I've met aren't the ones who claim to have it all figured out. They're the ones who lead with curiosity. They're grounded in humility, and because of that, they're constantly evolving, not because they're chasing perfection, but because they're brave enough to keep asking questions. And I've come to believe this, when you admit you don't know, life leans in. The universe starts to show you things you wouldn't have seen otherwise, not because they weren't there, but because your certainty was blocking the view. So if you're in a season where things feel unclear, where the path ahead isn't marked, where the old answers don't seem to fit anymore, maybe that's not a failure. Maybe it's an invitation to soften, to listen, to ask, to listen, to ask, to begin again. Maybe it's a gift wrapped in uncertainty. Because some of the most beautiful parts of life don't show up in plans. They arrive in questions, in detours, in conversations that don't go the way you thought they would, in ideas that shake something loose inside you, in moments where you pause long enough to say, wait, what if I'm wrong? And maybe being wrong isn't something to fear. Maybe it's how we grow. And when we grow, when we truly stay open to discovering more, we become more than just knowledgeable. We become teachable, reachable, human. And in a world that often rewards performance, that kind of honesty is rare, but it's powerful. Because it creates a space where real discovery can happen, where we don't just learn about the world, we learn about ourselves. And what you'll find, the more you allow yourself to not know, is that you begin to see others more clearly too. You stop assuming, you start listening, you start finding the humanity behind every opinion, every experience, every silence. And that makes you wiser, not because you know more, but because you need to know less to feel whole. You're no longer held hostage by needing to be right. You've made peace with mystery, and in that peace, you begin to experience something else. The gift of spontaneity, the wonder of what unfolds when you stop trying to control it all. And that brings us gently into the next paradox. The best moments are the ones you didn't plan. It's funny how much energy we spend trying to plan our lives. We make lists, set goals, map out the months and years ahead, as if clarity could protect us from disappointment, as if the right sequence of events would guarantee happiness. And there's comfort in that. There's nothing wrong with wanting structure or direction. It helps us feel safe, like we have a handle on things. I've lived by plans for most of my life. I liked knowing what was coming next. I liked feeling prepared. But life rarely asks for permission before it unfolds. And the older I get, the more I realize that some of the most beautiful moments I've ever experienced weren't the ones I worked for or scheduled. They were the ones that caught me off guard, the ones I never saw coming, the unexpected conversations, the missed turns that led to magic, the ordinary days that turned out to be anything but. There was this one afternoon I'll never forget. I had nothing special planned, just errands and emails, and the usual rhythm of a Thursday. But on my way home, I ran into an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We ended up sitting on a bench in the park, talking for 3 hours as the sun dipped below the trees. We laughed, we cried a little, and something in both of us softened. That day wasn't marked on any calendar, but it left a permanent mark on my heart. And that's the thing. The best moments don't arrive with fanfare. They sneak in, quietly, when you're not looking, when your guard is down, when your heart is open, without even knowing it. Of course, not everything that's unplanned is joyful. Life surprises us in painful ways too. But there's something undeniably powerful about the way joy can sneak into the cracks, into the places we least expect. It shows up in a smile from a stranger, when you're having a hard day, in a song on the radio that feels like it was written just for you, in a child's question that disarms you and makes you laugh from somewhere deeper than usual. And none of those things were in your planner, which is maybe the point. We think happiness is something we construct, something we engineer through hard work, strategy, and discipline. And yes, those things matter. But sometimes the happiest moments don't come from effort. They come from presence, from being available to the life that's happening, while you're busy planning the one you think you need. I remember a trip I once took that was meticulously planned. Every day was mapped out. Where we'd go, what we'd see, what time we'd arrive. But the moment that still makes me smile today, it wasn't on the itinerary. It was when we got lost trying to find a restaurant and ended up in a tiny backstreet cafe with string lights and music and people dancing in the middle of the day. We stayed for hours. It felt like something out of a dream. And that dream happened because the plan fell apart. It makes you wonder how much we miss by clinging too tightly. How often we rush through the day, focused on the next thing, and forget to leave room for wonder. The truth is, spontaneity has a different kind of magic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need permission. It just happens. And when it does, it reminds you that life isn't meant to be fully controlled. It's meant to be felt. And maybe that's what the best moments really are. Little awakenings. Tiny reminders that joy isn't something we have to chase. It's something that already exists, waiting for us to be still enough, loose enough, present enough to receive it. But to do that, we have to let go a little, loosen the grip, leave space in the day, in the heart, in the conversation. We have to stop needing every detail to go right, because sometimes wrong is where the miracle lives. I've learned that when plans fall through, there's often something else waiting to step in, something softer, simpler, more alive, a better conversation, a quieter joy, a surprise that feels like it was meant just for you. You don't have to control every detail of your life to create meaning. Sometimes, meaning arrives in the unplanned pause, in the unscripted laugh, in the messy, unexpected, completely ordinary magic of being right here. That's the paradox. The tighter you plan, the more you risk missing what's real. But the more space you leave for life to surprise you, the more beauty finds its way in. So yes, plan, dream, move forward with intention, but leave space in your life for the moments you can't predict, the ones that can't be measured, only felt, the ones that don't fit inside a schedule, but somehow fit perfectly into your heart. And if you do, you might start to notice something else, that when you stop trying to control the timing, the outcome, the exact picture of how it all should look, you begin to trust more, not just in life, but in others, in yourself, in the unfolding. Which brings us, slowly and gently, to the next paradox. Letting others shine doesn't dim your light. Somewhere along the way, many of us learn to believe that the world runs on competition, that there's only so much love to go around, only so much attention, only so many chances, that if someone else is shining, it somehow means there's less light left for us. So we shrink, we compare, or we compete. Even if we don't want to admit it, we start measuring our own worth against the success of others, their promotions, their relationships, their happiness. It can start to feel like a reflection of our own failure, even when it has nothing to do with us. I've felt it before, that small sinking feeling when someone else gets exactly what you've been working for. That tightness in your chest when you see someone thriving and wonder, why not me? It's not envy in the cruel sense, it's more subtle, a quiet ache that whispers, you're falling behind. But here's the truth, I've come to learn, over and over again, letting others shine doesn't take away from your light. It doesn't diminish your beauty, your value, or your potential. In fact, the more you celebrate someone else's glow, the more your own light begins to rise. Because joy multiplies when it's shared, and confidence, the real kind, isn't threatened by someone else's success, it's strengthened by it. I remember being at a small gathering once, where everyone went around sharing something they were proud of. Most people hesitated, trying to downplay their wins or brush them off. But one woman spoke with this grounded clarity. She said, I'm proud of what I've built, and I'm not going to apologize for loving it. What struck me most wasn't just her words, but how the room responded. Instead of shrinking or judging, everyone leaned in, smiling, nodding, inspired. Her pride wasn't arrogance, it was permission. It gave the rest of us room to take up space too. And that's what happens when someone shines without shrinking. It opens something in us. We remember that it's safe to be seen, that we don't have to compete, that we can all glow, side by side. Because light is not limited. It's not a scarce resource. Imagine a candle lighting another. It doesn't lose its flame. It simply spreads the fire. And suddenly, the room becomes warmer, brighter, more alive. That's how it works with people too. When you celebrate someone else's breakthrough, you're not giving anything away. You're building the kind of world where everyone gets to rise. Where it's normal to say, I'm so proud of you without secretly feeling like your own worth is at risk. And yes, it takes practice. Especially in a culture that rewards comparison. Especially if you've spent years measuring your value by what you can achieve. But the more you choose celebration over comparison, the freer you become. You start to notice that another person's beauty doesn't threaten your own. That someone else's spotlight doesn't put you in the shadows. It reminds you that the stage is big enough for all of us. And you begin to realize that when someone wins, it doesn't mean you've lost. It simply means something is possible. It means doors are opening. It means success is moving through the world. And that success might stop by your doorstep next. Not because you fought for it, but because you welcomed it. I've learned that the people who glow the brightest aren't the ones who try to outshine everyone else. They're the ones who reflect light onto others, who cheer when someone steps into their purpose, who make space at the table without keeping score. And you can be that person, even if you're still waiting for your moment, even if you're still figuring things out, even if part of you still aches when someone else gets what you're longing for. Because letting others shine while you're still growing, that's grace. That's maturity, that's power. And strangely enough, the more you support others in their light, the more you begin to believe in your own. You stop trying to prove yourself. You start trusting your timing. You start seeing your journey not as something to race through, but as something sacred in its own right. And slowly, you begin to glow in a way that doesn't beg for attention, but simply is, steady, warm, real. So if you're feeling like everyone else is ahead of you, pause. Take a breath, and remind yourself that someone else's shine is not your shadow. It's an invitation, a mirror, a possibility. And you, exactly as you are right now, are not behind. You're on your way. Because your light doesn't come from winning. It comes from being fully yourself, from embracing what's uniquely yours, from showing up honestly without needing to compare, compete, or conform. And in that honesty, something else begins to rise. A quiet sense of richness. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, you already have more than you realized. Which brings us to our next paradox. You become rich by not needing to be. When we hear the word rich, most of us immediately think of money. We picture bank accounts, big houses, luxury, and everything that glitters. We're taught early on that wealth equals success, and that success equals happiness. And so we chase it, consciously or not. More things, more security, more status. The idea is planted in us young. The richer you become, the more fulfilled you'll be. But something strange happens when you start to meet people who have everything and still feel empty, or when you start to notice that some of the people who radiate the most warmth, joy, and presence aren't rich at all, at least not by the world's standards. I once sat with an older man in a tiny village cafe. His hands were rough from decades of work, his shirt faded, his life visibly simple, and yet he had this quiet glow, a peacefulness in his eyes, a kindness that didn't rush. I asked him what made him feel rich. He smiled and said, "Nothing in my pocket, but I laugh every day. I sleep well. I know who I am." And that answer landed in me like a soft truth. I'd always known, but never fully trusted. You become rich by not needing to be. It's not about what you accumulate. It's about what you stop needing to feel whole. Because real richness isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in how deeply you live, how freely you breathe, how little you need to feel at home in yourself. I used to think I needed more in order to feel okay. More money, more validation, more safety nets. I kept imagining this future version of myself who had it all figured out and who finally felt calm. But here's what I began to notice. The more I chased enough, the further away it seemed. The more I got, the more I feared losing it. The more I achieved, the more I felt I had to keep up. That's the trap of external wealth. It can never fill the inner space that's still grasping. But the moment I started letting go of expectations, of constant striving, of the need to prove anything, I began to feel lighter, richer, even. Not because my circumstances had changed, but because my definition of wealth had. I began to feel rich when I was sitting on the floor laughing with a friend, when I cooked a simple meal and ate it slowly, when I watched the sky change colors at the end of the day and realized I didn't need anything more than this. And the more I noticed those moments, the more they multiplied. Because when you stop needing more to feel enough, you suddenly have more than you ever realized. You start to see the value in things money can't buy: peace of mind, true connection, time that isn't rushed, a heart that isn't constantly reaching. That's real wealth. And the people who embody it, the ones who carry a quiet kind of contentment, are often those who've learned to detach their self-worth from their net worth, who've realized that needing less doesn't mean settling. It means seeing clearly. It means recognizing that your life is already full of things that matter. It means understanding that some of the richest moments cost nothing. It means no longer defining success by accumulation, but by alignment. And when you live like that, you stop performing, you stop over-explaining, you stop looking for gold in places that never offered you nourishment to begin with. You just live, with less clutter, but more clarity, with fewer distractions, but deeper connection, with less noise, but more meaning. There's a richness in presence that no amount of wealth can manufacture. The richness of waking up without dread, of going to bed without regret, of knowing that you lived honestly, even if you didn't live extravagantly. And in that way, the richest people I know are the ones who've simplified, who've stopped trying to impress, who've built their lives around what feels good to the soul, not just what looks good on paper. It's a quiet revolution, one that starts when you stop asking, "How can I get more?" and start asking, "What matters most?" And when you know what matters most, you no longer feel poor when the world says you're not enough, because you've found a deeper kind of enough, one rooted in truth, in stillness, in love. not in the chase. And here's the beautiful part. The less you need, the more you're able to give. Not because you have excess, but because you have peace. And peace is something worth sharing. So maybe the path to feeling rich isn't paved with more. Maybe it's cleared by letting go. Letting go of scarcity, of pressure, of proving, and embracing what's already yours. The quiet joy, the slow mornings, the sound of someone you love breathing beside you, the way the light pours into your room when you don't rush to meet the day, the feeling of being safe inside your own skin. No amount of money can buy that. And when you stop needing it to, you're free. And when you're free, something else becomes possible. You're no longer afraid of limits. You're no longer afraid of less. You begin to discover that sometimes, the very thing you feared, restriction, stillness, pause, might actually be the thing that opens you. And that leads us gently into the final paradox of this series. You become free by accepting limitations. For most of my life, I thought freedom meant having no limits. Freedom to me was the ability to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, however I wanted. No boundaries, no restrictions, no rules. That was the dream, a wide, open field with no fences, just endless possibility. But the older I get, the more I realize that some of the deepest peace I've ever felt came not from escaping limits, but from learning to live within them. Because here's the quiet paradox. You don't become free by removing all boundaries. You become free by accepting that some things are simply not meant to be pushed past, and not because you're weak, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally learning the difference between what's possible and what's sustainable, between what's desirable and what's actually right for you. There was a time when I said yes to everything, every opportunity, every invite, every expectation. I thought that was freedom, having the power to do it all. But it didn't take long before that version of freedom started to feel like a trap, like a life so full of movement that I had nowhere left to be still. I was stretched thin, exhausted, not by life itself, but by the pressure to live without limits. And it made me realize something. True freedom isn't about saying yes to everything. It's about learning when to say no, not out of fear, but out of care, out of respect for the energy you actually have, the time you've been given, the body that carries you, the mind that needs quiet, the soul that needs pause. And sometimes, the only way to experience that kind of freedom is to accept your limitations, your humanness, your seasons, your boundaries, your needs. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Because when you accept your limits, you stop fighting reality, and you start dancing with it. You begin to notice where your energy wants to go, instead of where it's being pulled by pressure or guilt. You begin to build a life that honors who you really are, not who you think you should be, if you had no constraints. I used to believe I needed to be more productive, more available, more capable. But what I really needed was to breathe, to rest, to stop expecting myself to be everything for everyone, all the time. And when I finally started letting go of that expectation, I felt something unexpected: relief, peace, clarity. Not because I had shrunk, but because I had stopped pretending to be bigger than I am. Because we're not meant to be limitless. We're meant to be real, and real comes with limits. We have a certain amount of energy in a day. We have a body that needs care. We have relationships that need attention. We have hearts that bruise and dreams that take time. When we accept that, not resentfully, but gently, we start to make choices that actually fit, lives that actually feel livable, schedules that don't leave us hollow, goals that don't crush us under the weight of constant striving. And strangely, that's where the freedom begins. Not in endless options, but in intentional ones. Not in removing every fence, but in choosing where to plant the garden. Not in denying your limits, but in learning how to honor them. I once heard someone say, a river needs banks to flow. Without them, the water spreads too thin, becomes stagnant, loses its power. And maybe we're the same. Maybe the limits we think are holding us back are actually shaping us, giving us focus, giving us form, helping us become something, instead of trying to be everything. Because here's what I know. The people who feel most free aren't the ones who live without any structure. They're the ones who've built a life inside their real capacity. A life that breathes with them. A life that lets them rest. A life that's not constantly pushing them past the edge. And when you live like that, something shifts. You stop performing. You stop pretending you don't need support. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can carry. You start asking softer questions. What's sustainable for me? What's kind? What's honest? And when you live from those questions, you stop needing to escape your life to feel free. You feel it inside your life, in the way it flows, in the way it meets you where you are. That's not settling, that's sovereignty, that's choosing your limits, instead of letting them choose you. And as you do, you begin to notice something else, that the freedom you were chasing in a million directions might have been here all along. It was never about doing everything. It was about doing what matters, with presence, with peace, and with enough energy left at the end of the day to say, yes, this feels like mine. So maybe the key isn't to become more, maybe the key is to become truer. And sometimes that means letting go of what's limitless, so you can finally live what's real. That's where your freedom lives now, not in the myth of perfection, but in the grace of enough. And that brings us to the close of this journey, a journey through paradoxes that aren't meant to be solved, but lived, one breath at a time, one truth at a time, one heart-opening moment after another. Because life isn't either, it's both and. It's heavy and light, it's messy and beautiful, it's full of questions that don't need answers, only presence. And the more you learn to live inside those paradoxes, the more alive you become.